November 8th, 1983. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Mr. John Brown.
Mr. Brown, where were you born?
Born in Marysville, Kansas, close to Marysville.
When's your birthday?
November the 27th.
What year?
You mean when I was born?
Yes, what year?
It was 1885.
Who was your father?
J.G. Brown.
Where was he from?
He was from Chicago. He used to garden around there.
Who was your mother?
I can't think of her last name. Her first name was Sarah. I sure can't think of her last name.
Where was she from?
She was around Chicago too. She was really a Hollander.
How come your parents moved to Kansas?
Well, Kansas was just opening up then, and he wanted to get in on the early part of the street. He was kind of a fellow that liked to be on the frontier.
Was your father in the Civil War?
No, he was too young.
Too young.
He wanted to go, but he was just 18, or I believe he was 18, and they wouldn't take him.
Was your grandfather in the war?
No, my grandfather drowned in the Fox River.
Did your father ever talk about the Civil War?
Oh, not much. He didn't know too much about it. He was working as a boot maker then.
In Chicago?
Yeah.
How big was your hometown?
What is?
How big was your hometown?
Oh, I really don't remember. It wasn't in Marysville, Kansas. I expect it was about maybe 4,000 or 5,000.
What did the downtown look like? Do you remember?
The town?
Yes, sir.
No, I sure don't. I have never been back there since.
How long did you live in Marysville?
Well, they lived there. I was born there. I guess I lived there till I moved to Oklahoma, about 8 years.
Did you start to school in Marysville?
Well, there was a little country school that I went to that near Marysville. That is, we didn't live in Marysville. We lived in the country. And there was a little country school there that I went to. And I forget the name of it.
After your father moved to Kansas, what kind of work did he do?
He was a farmer.
Farmer? What kind of chores did you do on the farm?
Well, he raised a good many horses and just general farm work.
Do any plowing?
What is it?
Did you do any plowing?
Plowing? Yeah, with a walking plow.
How many acres could you plow in one day?
About 3 was a big day's work.
What kind of crops did you raise?
And, well, I was so young, I don't remember him. But I think it was corn, one thing I know. And he had orchard there, raised a good many apples. I know they made cider out of apples, I can remember that.
What kind of house did you live in on the farm in Kansas?
It was a frame house.
Frame house?
Yeah.
Okay. What year did you move to Oklahoma?
Well, let's see, I was 8 years old, and I was born in 1885. You figure it out. You can figure it easier than I can.
Would it be 94?
Yeah, it must have been 90, around 90. Let's see.
Did you say your father made the run into the Strip?
Yeah, him and my two older brothers.
Was that in 93?
Yeah.
Did he tell you about? Did you see the run?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No, I was in Kansas then.
Did your father talk about making the run?
Yeah, I've heard him talk about it.
What did he say about it?
Well, he rode a horse and was a race horse. And he started on the north side of Oklahoma. And one of my brothers rode a mule, and the other one rode a horse. And all three of them got farms. One of them joined the farm of my father, and the other one was about a mile.
What area of the Strip were the farms in?
What do you say?
What area of the Strip were the farms
We
in?
were about 20 miles southeast of Enid. Enid was where they had to go and register.
Did he talk about having to file what the day was like?
Well, they had to line up. I don't think he was in the line, but he said they lined up there and waited till morning after the office closed. They couldn't register, and so they just stood there till morning. A lot of them did.
What kind of house did your father build on the claim?
It is a frame house.
Frame house? Did you help your father break sod?
No, I was too young.
When did you move down to the farm?
I was 8 years old
Okay.
when I moved down there.
Was it the same year of the run, or was it the next year?
It was the next year
Next
after
year.
the run. Maybe later than that, I don't know.
How did you come to Oklahoma?
In camp wagon.
Can you tell me about the trip?
Yeah, there was another family by the name of Highfield, and they had a couple of wagons, and we had about 3 wagons, I believe. And it took us, I don't know, several days to make the trip down there.
What's your favorite memory of that trip?
Well, one was we camped by a stream there, and I was just a little kid, and I was fishing there with the pole, and my brother and one of the Highfield girls got into messing around and trying to throw one another in, trying to put them in, and I was there, and the girl was standing behind me. And no, my brother was standing behind me, and this girl run to push him in, and he stepped aside, and she pushed me in. I went in the water, and my brother got me out.
You say you had 3 wagons?
Yeah.
Okay. How many were in your family at that time?
Let's see. There was 9 of us kids, and they was, I guess, all there but one. My older sister was living in Kansas.
Yeah.
She wasn't in with us as we went down.
How long did it take to make the trip to Oklahoma?
I really don't remember. I think it was about 4 or 5 days, maybe 8. I don't remember.
Where did everybody sleep?
In the wagons or on the ground if it wasn't raining. They mostly slept in the wagons.
What kind of meals did your mother fix on the trip?
Well, of course, we had to fix it on the campfires, and it was just general run of food. Wasn't too much variety.
What kind of household items did you bring with you?
I don't remember.
What was your first impression of Oklahoma when you got here?
When I was there,
Yeah.
it looked pretty bare to me. Everything was new.
Was the house completed?
Well, no, it was, we didn't, it was completed, I guess what you'd call completed in that day and time. It was sideboard, boarded up on the outside and then sealed with boards on the inside.
Is that board and batten?
I didn't.
Was it what you call board and bat?
I expect something like that.
Okay. Did you move in the house?
Yeah, as soon as it was built. And then the second year there, we didn't raise a thing. That first year, it broke out sod. And father and two older brothers went over in the Cherokee Nation and shucked corn for a living.
And what did you do while they were shucking corn?
Oh, I was just a little old kid running around there. I had a brother younger than me, and we was the two youngest ones in the family. And we wasn't really big enough to run around, to work.
What kind of games did you play?
Well, we just had a little wagon, and we played with that.
Where did you go to school in the Strip?
They built a schoolhouse a mile west of where we lived, and we went to school there.
What was the name of it?
Well, I don't believe I can remember what the name of it was anymore. I can remember the schoolhouse. It's just as plain in my mind as anything, but I can't remember the name.
Remember your teacher's name?
The first one? Let's see. I believe it is Maggie Shores, if I remember right.
Yeah. Was it a one-room schoolhouse?
Yeah.
How many students went there?
Oh, I expect there was about 15.
How long did you live on the farm?
We lived there about, we left there in 1905. That'd be about, I guess, about 8 years, wasn't it? Or 12, something like that.
Yeah. Do you remember the Spanish-American War?
Yeah.
Tell me what you remember of it.
Well, I just remember one of the neighbors that went with to the war there, a man the name of McArdle. They were a family that lived by us there, and one of the boys went to the war there. And I remember Teddy Roosevelt as a Rough Rider.
Did you see him?
No, I didn't see him.
Did you hear any stories about the Rough Riders?
Well, yeah, we heard all kinds of stories.
Do you remember any of them?
Well, they said that Teddy was a fellow that wasn't afraid of nothing, and him and his Rough Riders played quite a game in the war. And he was elected president later, you know.
Right. Were there big celebrations when the war ended, Spanish-American War?
Not where we lived, there wasn't. I don't remember it.
When was the first time you went to Enid?
Well, I was a kid. We didn't go very often. I expect I was about 14.
What do you remember of the town?
Well, I remember we'd hauled wheat there. And I was holding a team out in the front They wasn't his standing. They tried to get away, and my father grabbed the line just in time to keep them from running off. Otherwise, they'd have got away in town there. I don't know what they'd have done.
How big was Enid at that time?
Well, it wasn't very big.
Mm-hmm.
I don't expect there's over maybe 2,000 or 3,000.
Were the buildings frame, brick?
Yeah,
frame?
everything was frame
Yeah.
and no pavement or anything.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take to drive to Enid?
We'd go up one day and come back the next.
Where'd you spend the night?
We'd spend it on a camp wagon. In the camp house.
Hey, what's the camp house?
Well, it was a house built with, you see, they had places there for to keep the horses, one thing or another. I forget what they called them now. But, and then they had a camp house there.
Was it kind of like a wagon yard?
Yeah, that's what it was, a camp house in the wagon yard.
Okay.
We'd generally cook our meals in there, and then we'd sleep in our wagon.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Where was that wagon yard located? What part of town?
I couldn't tell you. It's been so long ago, and I was just young then, and I couldn't tell you what part
Do you
of town.
remember who ran the wagon yard?
No, I don't. I remember when we'd take a load of wheat in, there'd be a half a dozen fellas jump on there to make a bid on it.
Mm-hmm. Did you raise any cotton?
No.
Just wheat?
Yeah, I think my father let the girls put in a little patch one time to buy a organ with. Mm-hmm. And that was all the cotton we ever raised.
Tell me about threshing time.
About what?
Threshing time. You know, when time to harvest the wheat.
Oh, about harvest time?
Yeah.
Well, that was really a hard time for us. We had everything done with horses, and it'd be hot weather, and they had run 2 binders. I got big enough to run one, and my father run the other, and then we paid $1 a day for shockers. Mm-hmm. And
what would the shockers do?
Shock the bundles up. We see the binders made bundles, and they'd gather them up. Of course, they were in windrows. We'd dump them each time as we come along in a windrow, and the shockers would pick them up and put them in shocks.
How many acres of wheat did you have?
Well, my father had a school section leased, and we run about 250 acres of wheat after we got started.
When you planted the wheat, did you just broadcast the seed?
The first year, I think he broadcasted it, the oats and the wheat, but after that we got a drill, a wheat drill.
Now, how does a wheat drill work?
Well, it's about 10 feet, and well, they're different sizes. I think we had about a 12-foot one, and the discs on it, they had discs for opening the furrows, but they was about that far apart. There'd be about 12 discs on it.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
Remember what?
Statehood Day, 1907?
1907.
When Oklahoma became a state.
Oh, yeah, I remember when Bird and, what was that other fellow's name that run for with him, trying to get elected so we get statehood, you know. Neff and Bird. Bird was a Republican and Neff was a Democrat. And they'd come around and make speeches, you know. And those kids, father does us go with them to hear the speeches. And one thing that that tickled me in the speech. There was a young fella, he was just about 21, and he was there, and he was a red-hot Republican, and Neff was speaking. Every once in a while, he'd holler, "Hurrah for Byrd." And finally, Neff got tired of it. He stopped and he pointed his finger at that fella. "You know what's the matter with that fella?" He says, "He reminds me of a man with, let's see, how did he state that? A man of all mouth and no brains." And the crowd sure did roar. That shut him up.
Did you meet any of the territorial governors?
What do you say?
Did you meet any of the territorial governors?
Well, I just met them when they was running for office. They'd generally stay at our house. My father would keep them whether they were Republicans or Democrats. He was a Democrat.
Which ones do you remember?
Well, let's see. I don't believe I remember this. I don't remember which ones it was that stayed there.
Yeah, okay. Were there big celebrations on Statehood Day?
On when?
On Statehood Day, when Oklahoma became a state?
I couldn't tell you. It seemed to me like there was, but I'm not sure. I know the Indians used to pass by us in great strings, and then they'd camp on the school ground.
Tell me about the Indians.
Well, they'd come in horses and buggies and wagons. And there'd be a whole string of them going to camp or to visit some other tribe. And they'd always camp on that section. It was about 2.5 miles from home there. And they'd always camp on there and generally have a war dance, or I don't know if it was a war dance or not. They'd have a dance there. The older boys would go up and see them, but us kids was afraid of them. They wouldn't talk to a white man if they could get away from it.
Do you remember the Depression of 1907?
The what?
Depression of 1907?
1907, let's see, 19 well, I was in Texas then.
When did you move to Texas?
We moved to Texas in 1905.
How come you moved to Texas?
Let's see, was it 1905? Yeah, I guess it was. Well, my brother-in-law come out there and he had a grist mill there in Marshall. And he come out there and traded it for a lot of land, and the land was cheap. Get it for $3 an acre, and my father and one of my both brothers bought land out there. My father bought 2 sections, and my brothers each bought a section. And that was the reason we went out there, and we liked it out there anyhow.
Your brother-in-law had a grist mill in Marshall?
Yeah, fellow by the name of Helton. He bought it.
Was that here in Marshall, Oklahoma?
Yeah. W.L. Helton. He taught school there a while too, and his sister taught school.
What part of Texas did you move to?
Well, it's about 20 miles from the Oklahoma line, about 31 miles from Canadian, south south and a little east of Canadian.
How long did you live in Texas?
I lived there till I got to where I had to go to a rest home. That was about 8 years ago. I had to go in the rest home, and I went in the rest home there at Erie. It was the closest one.
Yeah. How come you came up here?
Well, I had two daughters, and they both moved up here, so that left me down there by myself. So I moved up here on that account.
How big was your farm in Texas?
Well, I farmed 1,100 acres. I moved it up. We was in Hemphill County, or Wheeler County to start with when I was young, and then after I married, I moved to Hemphill County. My wife's folks lived there, and I got a section in there, and I farmed there for 7 years, and then I moved to Lipscomb County. And I lived there about 3 years, and then I moved to Dallam County, the last county in the state.
What did you raise mainly?
We raised them generally maize and oats and wheat and stuff like that, Kaffir corn.
When did you see your first automobile?
Let's see, it was pretty early when it was made. That is before I was married. I was married in 1911, and I expect about 1909, I imagine.
Where did you see your car?
Well, I seen one pass there by the place one time. Fellas run the hardware store there, and Canadian had bought it, him and his father.
What kind of car was it?
I think it was a Buick. I'm not right sure about that. The old Buick had their engine set crossways in there. I can remember that.
Did the land you bought in Texas have a house on it?
How was that?
Did the land that you and your family bought in Texas have a house on it?
I didn't get the question.
Did the land that your family bought in Texas have a house?
No. They was I don't know, kind of a real estate outfit that bought a lot of that land out there. And my brother-in-law, Helton, he traded that mill for a lot of it. And that's how come us out there. And there was a ranch right south of us that had 21 sections in it that joined us on the south. And I used to help them brand cattle in there. That was my first experience in branding cattle. They run a lot of cattle in there. And they was thinly settled around there, and they just get whoever they could, to help. And that was fun for me.
Tell me about branding cattle.
Well, they all had horns on them, and they were 2 and 3 years old, 3-year-old cattle, and we'd have to rope them on a horse, and one would catch them by the head, and the other one would rope them by the heel and stretch them out, and one fellow would grab them by the tail and throw them over. And then they'd castrate them and brand them, and sometimes they'd dehorn them. It took us about several days to do all of that.
When did you buy your first tractor?
Let's see, my first tractor, I'm trying to think where I was living. I believe it is about 19 and let's see, 19 and 14, I believe it was.
What kind of tractor was it?
Case.
What kind of wagons did you have?
Kind of what?
Wagons before you had a tractor. What kind of wagons did you have?
Well, we had what was called a Bain wagon, and one was a Studebaker, and one was a Bain.
What's the difference between a Studebaker and Bain?
Well, they're just mostly the name and the way they was made. Some liked one, some like another, just like it is cars. Some like one car and some another. Then they were different sizes. There was a light wagon, and then there was a heavier wagon.
Which one did you have?
Well, I had one of each. I had a Bain, it was a light one, and the Studebaker was a heavier wagon.
What would you use the lighter wagon for?
What is?
What would you use the light wagon for?
Well, we didn't have too much to haul. We'd use it to haul. And if we had the heavy stuff to haul, we'd use the bigger wagon.
What kind of maintenance do you have to perform on a wagon?
Oh, there wasn't very much, only keeping it greased. I had to take the wheels off to grease them. We'd jack them up and pull them nearly off, and we could put wagon.
How much did a wagon cost back then?
About $60.
What did that include?
I did.
What came with the wagon?
Well, nothing but the double trees and the neck yoke and sideboards. It had a bed on it. And of course, that was part of the wagon. You could get extra boards to make it higher. The wagon would hold about 25 bushel of ear corn or 50 bushel of shell corn.
Now, would that include the bows and the wagon sheet?
What is it?
Would that include the bows and the wagon sheet?
No, I had to buy them extra.
What did they cost?
Well, I never bought them. My father bought them. They wasn't very high. Everything was pretty cheap then. I don't know just what they would cost.
What were the wagons made of? What kind of wood?
Well, they called them oak. The hubs was oak, and the bed was made out of pine or there's another kind of, I forget what the name of the lumber was in it. But the axle and all of that was made out of hickory.
How often would you have to change the tire, the rim on the wagon wheel?
Oh, we didn't have to change them. They were made of steel, you see. And we'd have to have them shrunk every once in a while. They'd get loose.
Who would do that?
Blacksmith.
How do you shrink the tire?
Well, some of them would cut them and weld them, shorten them that way in the early day, and then they got an outfit that would crimp them and put them in there, and they had leverage enough on them so they could pull them together to a certain, and they'd take a caliper and make a dot in each side and measure to see just how much they could take up on it. That way it wouldn't cup the wheel. If you got them too tight, it'd cup your wheel, ruin your wheel. If you didn't get them tight enough, well, they'd get loosened a little bit.
Ever have spokes that became loose?
What is?
Ever have spokes that came loose?
When the tire would get too loose, lots of times they'd work loose.
How would you tighten up the spoke?
Well, they'd generally put in new spokes.
What were the spokes made of?
What is?
What were the spokes made of? What kind of wood?
They were made of hickory.
Hickory?
And the hubs was made of birch. That's something that didn't split very easy.
How often did you have to grease the wheels?
Oh, we'd grease them every time we made a trip to Canada and back.
What kind of grease would you use?
Well, it was called wagon grease. It was a heavy grease. You just put it on with the paddle.
Mm-hmm. Did you know anyone that went to the Mexican border with Pancho with General Pershing?
How is that?
Did you meet anyone that went to the Mexican border with General Pershing?
No.
You know when they were chasing Pancho Villa?
No, I don't remember any of them that went there.
Okay. Tell me about World War I, 1917, 1918.
Well, I didn't have to go. I was a fireman and they didn't take me.
Mm-hmm.
But two of my friends that went, they both got killed in World War One.
What were their names?
One of them was Zybach, Zybach,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one was he lived in Canadian. I can't think of his name. The boat went down with him when he was going over it.
Mm-hmm.
But Zybach was killed in action.
Yeah. Were there big celebrations on Armistice Day?
Yeah, they had quite a celebration on
Tell
that.
me about that.
Well, I wasn't in it, but I remember them in Canadian that they had a big celebration. They, of course, was way back in. They didn't have too much to celebrate with, only just the old timers.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have a big lemonade stand, get all the lemonade you want to drink for a nickel. And
Did they do what they call shooting the anvils?
shooting anvils.
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember whether they did or not. I wasn't in the celebration. We lived quite a ways from it, and I couldn't really tell much.
Mm-hmm.
I remember them doing that in chivalry, and they'd put one anvil on top of the other, and they had the hole in there, you know, for the chisel to use, and they'd fill that up, and that'd roar. You could hear it for miles. And they'd shoot that off, fill that with powder.
What was that called?
I didn't.
What did you call that?
Well, it was a shooting anvil,
Yeah.
is what they called it.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd pull it. I remember my brother got married. They pulled the old steam engine up there and tied the whistle down. Man, it sure. And they made lots of racket back there in the early day in chivalry, and
Mm-hmm.
they really had quite a time.
How did the Depression and the Dust Bowl affect you?
Well, it just about took everything I had. I was living at Dalhart then, and man, it blowed up in piles there that was waist high. And of course, there's all bare ground between them. And I was farming another fella had bought a section there, and I was farming it. I hadn't bought but one then, and he come out and looked at it, and he said it wasn't worth a dime. Said it never would be. But you know, the Russian thistles would grow on top of those. Well, when the wind kind of quit blowing, there was 3 years we never raised a thing. And when the wind quit blowing, well, we took a harrow and harrow them weeds off and list up the hard ground when it rained so we could. And the wind just blew it over there and leveled that off as nice as could be. It looked like it was ruined for sure, but then when we got it listed up, well, the wind would blow that and them ditches would catch that sand, you know. And it wasn't near as bad as what it looked like it was going to be.
If you didn't raise any crops for 3 years, how did you survive?
Well, I had a bunch of cattle that I sold. I had some there that I'd paid $100 for, thoroughbreds, and I got 20 for them when I had to get rid of them. I didn't have nothing for them to eat, and I had a bunch of hogs, and I sold them just what I could get for them, and didn't bring hardly anything. And then the government loaned us $400 a year to farm on, and we'd borrow that every year. I owed them $2,000 when I got to where I could make it, and I paid every nickel back. My brother and I did. There's lots of them never did pay them a thing.
Did you use any special farming techniques to try to save the soil in the dust storms?
How was that?
Did you use any special farming techniques to save the soil in the dust storms?
Well, we used what was called chisels. It is a big, heavy piece of steel that they'd make, and it's about as wide as my finger, 4 fingers there, and we'd have put 2 of them on a lister, and that'd go through that hard ground, and tear them big chunks up. And when the wind blew that sand in there then, and it rained in there, well, we could go over that with a harrow and bust them up, and that leveled the ground pretty nicely.
Did you have any shelter belts planted on your place?
No, I didn't on well, I did too. I had a small one around the house there. But it was so dry, it didn't do very good. After I sold out, we kept them alive, and it made a pretty good growth after I left there.
Yeah. What kind of trees were they?
Let's see, what did they put? I believe they were the Chinese elm. I'm sure they were.
Yeah.
Them was hard old years, and them 3 years up there. Most people lost their land.
Yep.
But they taken out the government loan, and we bought our land. We had a loan in the Kansas City. I forget what they called that. It's anyhow some outfit up there that we bought our land, and we got what we had to borrow. We borrowed from them, and there's an old man that's the head of that. He come out there during that when it was really at its worst, and he drove up to my place, and he shook his head. He said, "I don't know how in the world you ever can stay here, but," he said, "if you do," he says, "we'll never crowd you." They didn't. They knocked off all the interest and everything, and all we paid was the principal that we bought it with to start with. But there wasn't but the 4 or 5 of us that had a loan in that. The most of it is in this government outfit, and they foreclosed on every one of them. Land that sold for $18 and $20, you could buy for $2 or $3. I bought a half a section that was right south of me. There's some fellows bought it to start with as an awful pretty half of buffalo grass. They come from Hooker, Oklahoma down there. They broke it up, and that dry year hit, they went broke. And I bought it for $6 and paid $200 down on it, and then they let me have it what time I needed to pay the rest.
What was their name?
That bought it to start with?
Yeah.
Witt.
Wick.
Claude Witt. I forgot what his brother's name was. He was a big fat fellow. He was a nice fellow, though.
In those 3 years that you didn't raise a crop, what kind of meals did your wife fix?
Well, we had a lot of stuff canned up and one thing and another, and we got a little help from the government, and we'd lived pretty simple. We'd generally have a hog and we'd accumulate enough to feed him with to butcher.
What time of year would you butcher?
What time?
Yeah.
In the fall of the year when
Fall.
it's cold weather.
How long does it take to cure out the hams?
Well, if we butchered it to cure it, we'd generally rub it in salt good and bury it in salt. And it'd take, we'd just leave it in there for about a month.
Would you smoke your hams?
Well, we didn't then, but in my earlier years we did. My father-in-law used to kill a lot of hogs, and he generally cured. We'd butcher with him, and then he'd cure. We butchered 20-some hogs there one day. Weigh around 250 to 300. That is before the Depression, though.
What about World War II?
Well, World War II, I didn't have to go then. I was a farmer. They didn't take the farmers. And I don't remember too much about the World War II. And there was quite a bunch went from there. I remember there was my brother-in-law, Helton, was on the board, draft board, and the banker there. Well, them that owed the banker, well, he'd get them excused, you know. And my brother-in-law, he didn't like that, so he wouldn't stay on the board. He said if they was going to be crooked about it, he wouldn't be on the board. Them fellas, big, stout young men could have went, but they owed him, and he'd get them deferred. A fellow by the name of Wilbur. He run the bank, one of the banks there.
How big, can you describe Canadian?
Yeah, Canadian was just a little town when we moved there. I expect it was about maybe 1,200. And they had a big store there, hardware store and a grocery store. Well, they had 2 or 3. They was all together, you know. And the one where we traded, the man the name of Johnson owned it, and he had groceries and hardware and clothing. Had sold all of that in one store. And then as it built up, why more stores come in. It was just my father-in-law and his wife was the first couple that was married in Hemphill County. He used to freight with a bunch of them from Dodge City, Kansas to Mobile. Mobile was a little town there where the government had kept a bunch of soldiers, you know, to help tame the Indians. Did you ever read Custer's book?
What was the name of it?
Let's see. The Horrors of Indian War.
Yeah. I know I haven't read it.
I got it and read it. I got a lot of information from there and a lot of things that I knew in there. But Custer was a great man. He got killed, you know, by the Indians finally.
Can you just give me a few reflections on your life in the Panhandle?
Well, I was just a kid. Well, I was about 18, I guess, when I moved to Texas. And, of course, everything was raw there. Our closest neighbor was 5 miles. Besides my brother, he lived closer. And we'd spend our Sundays mostly hunting prairie chickens. There were lots of prairie chickens there. And riding broncs, things like that, you know, or steers, whatever we could get. My father wouldn't let us ride the steers if he was home, but if he wasn't home, we'd ride them. And we had a lot of fun, but we didn't. After a while, we got acquainted with some fellows north of us. They lived on the Gagesby Creek, and they had the church down there. And one Sunday, my nephew, he was younger than my brother was yet. There was three of us, and we decided we'd ride down there to church. We didn't know a soul, and we slipped in, and it was already going on. We slipped in, sit down, and that's the first time I ever saw the girl I married. She was in the choir singing. There was about 9 girls there in the choir and 2 or 3 boys. And but as soon as church is over, why, we slipped out. We never talked to anybody. We was bashful. I never was around the girls any, only my sisters, and when they'd have company, we'd generally go out horse riding or hunting or something or other. And I was bashful as could be.
What do you like about farm life?
What is it?
What do you like about farm life?
What did I like about it?
Yeah.
Well, it was the freedom there was to it. You didn't have a boss over you. That's one thing I liked about it. There's lots of hard work. Then I liked to turn the soil and see things grow. And I was raised up as a farmer, and I loved to farm when it had rained, so we'd get to raise things. Well, I sure did like farming.
What do you dislike about farming?
What do you say?
What do you dislike about farming?
The dry weather more than anything else, and the labor. We got where they put that 8-hour labor day on. Why, that wasn't for the farmer. I quit when they put that on. Yeah. I was farming about 1,100 acres, and I had to have a man or two. My neighbor he hired them, and they'd quit and go in town about the middle of the afternoon. 8 hours is up, you know, and he'd stay out there and work till sundown. And I couldn't stand that. I just said, if that's the way it's going to be, I'll just sell out and quit.
Did you?
Yeah, I sold out.
When'd you sell out?
When?
Yeah.
In 38, I believe it was. I sold out, or 48 it was.
What'd you do after that?
Well, I went to Louisiana and stayed a year, and then I moved back to Shamrock, Texas. And I was about 64 or 5, and I just retired. I had a section there in the Hemphill County there. My wife her father had willed her a section there, and we had it. We kept it, and I sold out to it. I had it Dalhart. Then we willed it to my daughters. I had 2 daughters. They own it now. They got a little oil well on it.
Did you irrigate on your farm?
No.
No?
No, the water was too deep there. I had to go 400 feet to get a water well.
Is the water table falling out there?
Well, I think it is where they're irrigating now. And that you had the water wish to even get a water well where I lived there. The neighbor there, dug a well there. They told him, the fellers that was drilling, that there wasn't nothing to that water witching. And they put a well down, a hole in the ground at 425 feet and never got any water. Then my brother, he always water witched. He done that himself. And so he water witched and just moved over 20 feet and they put down there and got a good well.
How did he witch it?
With just a peach limb, forked stick. He hold it there, and then when he got over the water, that thing had turned down. I could get a hold of it back there, and it wouldn't do nothing for me, but it would for him. And then when I sold it, I had one section there that couldn't get water on, and the fellow bought it. And they told that he didn't believe in water witching, so he wanted to build a certain place, and he got a fellow to come out there and drill, and the driller said there wasn't nothing to water witching. They put a hole down about 450 feet and never got any water. So he wanted my brother to water witch for him then. And there was just one place on there, that streak about 20 foot wide, that he could find water. And it wasn't where he wanted to build, but he finally put a well down and got water there all right. A lot of them don't believe in water witching, but I sure do.
Well, Mr. Brown, I think we have a good interview.
Well, I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Lots of watermelons.
Yeah.
Where at?
And when we moved to Oklahoma there in that farm there.
Oh, on the strip?
Yeah, at the strip there.
What kind of watermelons did you raise?
Oh, we raised nearly all kinds. And we'd haul them in a wagon load and feed them to the pigs. That was great watermelon country on new ground.
Yeah. What kind of celebrations did you have in the strip, like on July 4th?
Well, on July the 4th, they generally gather, a bunch of them would, and just have a kind of a picnic. And they'd have serve ice cream, and the idea is that you could buy it there, buy ice cream and lemonade, and they just played games and such things as that.
What about Christmas in the strip?
Well, we'd have Christmas. We didn't have many presents, but then we'd always have a Christmas tree. And we'd just, of course, had it just in our home.
What kind of decorations did you put on the tree?
Oh, they made them out of different colored paper, and they'd cut them in strips and glue them together, and made different forms. And then if they'd be generally have one at the schoolhouse, and some of them would have presents, or little presents, what they could get, and hang on the tree and have lighted. Of course, it enthused us kids. It looked pretty. It was pretty. And have the trees lighted all up that way. What few presents there was, the people were too poor to put many presents on. I remember one fella telling about how they lived. He said that he had a meat rind that he used, and he'd loan it to his neighbors and to use. And he said he loaned it to one fella, and he cooked beans with it and ruined it. Or greens with it, I believe. They had all kinds of tales, funny tales about the strip. A lot of people quit and left there when, on account of hard times, A lot of them never did get a claim. They wasn't used to anything like that, and they just decided they'd rather not mess with it. There was a woman there that took a farm. She farmed it herself. Her name was Triplet. She used to teach school, and she done her own farming and everything. Big, coarse-looking woman. She talked just like a man.
Well, again, I want to thank you.
Well, you're entirely welcome. I wish I could have give you more details,
Oh, you did very good.
but old as I'm 97 years old, and I'll be 98 this month. My memory ain't as good as it came as it used to be.
Pretty good. Thank you.